Hello, this is Mike Burek, your host and producer of Krynica, The Well, a podcast series about topics of interest to Ukrainians and friends of Ukraine around the world. Today is Friday, January 23rd, 2026. This episode is produced for The Ukrainian Weekly, a newspaper published in English for the global Ukrainian community since 1933. Our guest today is Jurij Fedynskyj, a Ukrainian American composer, musician, singer-songwriter, luthier, which is a stringed instrument maker, cultural activist, and teacher known for his dedication to reviving and preserving ancient Ukrainian folk music traditions. Welcome, Jurij. How are you?
Thank you, Michael. Fantastic. Just got into Berlin from Poland last night. It's very nice to be in the quietude of Berlin after being in Kharkiv in Zaporizhia several weeks ago, and just to get out of Ukraine for the past 6 months being inside Ukraine, your stress kind of goes up a bit. So it's nice to be out of the bomb zone, let's say.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Anyway, can we start off with getting some information about your educational and professional background?
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, actually reading the Ukrainian Weekly as my babsa got it every, week or so. I went to American private and public school in Raleigh, North Carolina. In university, I studied classical piano as a piano major. I also had an excellent chance to go to the Bandura camp in Emlenton, Pennsylvania, which the Ukrainian Bandura Chorus in Cleveland has been setting up since Heroi Katasty's time. And after a study with Julian Katasty, you certainly know Jules, for I don't know how many years, those 10 years, really, even living in New York City, singing with Chor Dumka and Experimental Bandura Trio, the UBC itself at that point. Then I decided to go to Ukraine to continue my studies in a conservatory in Lviv, in Kiev, studying composition, conducting opera and bandura playing, academic bandura playing. After that, a 10-year study with the Kiev Kobzar Guild, a group of luthiers and also players who are reviving the instrument-making tradition of the Kobzar instruments, the bandura and the kobza. And I always consider myself a student even now. The past 15 years, I've been doing personal study on how to make not just the kobza and the bandura, but also a similar instrument in that family, the Ukrainian torban. Also, I live in a village now, and for 15 years, I specifically went there for education to learn how to sing the Kobzar folk style of singing, but not with the Kobzars, as they were killed in 1933 by Stalin, Stalinism, genocide, shooting, who knows. So my neighbors in the village of Krechkivka in the Poltava region, they have a legendary group called Drevo, Krechkivsky Drevo, and I've been singing with them as a soloist, even with my wife for the past 15 years. So lots of musical education, also experience creating musical ensembles such as Karpatiani, also Chore Kozatsky, fantastic work with Taras Kompanychenko, and a lot of other fantastic musicians in the realm of folklore and also jazz and classical music. And I'm still learning. Actually, now I'm learning to play the torban, the Ukrainian Baroque lute, which requires many years of study, playing polyphonic lute textures such as Bach, Weiss, Dowland. So I'm still studying, and at 50 years old, I have a lot of study ahead of me. I don't consider myself a good torban player, and it will take really, 10, 20 years before I'm actually a competent player. But it's okay. I'm in no rush. I have lots of projects going on. And besides study, I also have lots of practice as an instrument maker and also as a singer, Kobzar practitioner. Even today, I'm in Berlin. Going to have a big concert in the Gothic Cathedral down the road during a tour of about 50 concerts in Europe in these 2 months.
Jurij, let's unpack some of what you just gave us. First of all, I'm curious about Raleigh, North Carolina, and you being a Ukrainian American there. Where did your parents or grandparents come from in Ukraine, and why did they choose to settle in Raleigh, North Carolina?
Well, they didn't. Basically, my grandmother was from Great Ukraine, she said, from the East Hetmanshina, Poltava region. Grandfather from Lviv, So they actually met in Innsbruck as they were both fleeing the Bolsheviks and went with the Germans to get out. So when they came to America, they decided that the diaspora just wasn't a possibility, as these were super educated Ukrainians. Imagine a Ukrainian woman getting a college education during interwar, or really the Second World War period. So they both moved to Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, which specialized in Sovietology, where they both got professorships, which is very rare, especially today. But my mother, therefore, wasn't born in the diaspora. She married a non-Ukrainian American, Eric Brewer. So had some English and German roots, many generations in America. And she also decided to, take off, as a lot of Americans do, and live somewhere else. So they chose Raleigh as a up-and-coming new center, which now, some Americans say it's the best place to live in America. Maybe, I don't know. But it's a nice, booming, center, the research triangle. So I grew up there. You might consider like a last of the Mohicans. At that point, no Ukrainians there, no diaspora. But I've always had a fantastic fascination with anything Ukrainian, with my Ukrainian roots, culture, music, everything, and family, and even a diaspora, because again, I didn't have that experience before 16 years old.
Very interesting. And I should mention here that Raleigh, North Carolina now is an up-and-coming Ukrainian American community, and they're growing and they do a lot of activities down there. My brother lives not too far from there in Fayetteville. I'm curious about why you chose to pick up your life and head to Ukraine. Obviously, you were studying Ukrainian folk music traditions. I'm sure that had a lot to do with it.
The question is, where do you continue your education? What are you going to do when you grow up? I'm still trying to make that decision. I still haven't grown up, but I've come to the decision that, I'm getting there. Kobzar tradition is what I really love, but also early music traditions of the Turban. But why go to Ukraine? There was always a pull to go to Ukraine. After meeting the diaspora, when I was 16, going to this camp every year, eventually it came time to, go somewhere else for education. So I went to New York to have self-study, personal study with Julian Catasti for several years there, and living in Brooklyn, Astoria, and Manhattan. But when the World Trade Centers were attacked by terrorists, I had an invitation to go to Ukraine and play with this Ukrainian rock band called Haidamaki, a fantastic Cossack system. And I just like the idea of, as Sashko Yarmola said, your projects in America have no prospect. What are you going to do, playing in the UBC? And I was quite, not a nice thing to hear. I love the UBC and Julian Catasti, fantastic, interesting groups. But Sasha Yarmola gave me the charge, take your Gibson guitar, your Les Paul, and create a revolution with us. And I so much like the idea through even a form like rock and roll with a new up-and-coming form, the ethno rock in Ukraine, which at that point didn't exist. And we did that revolution, the Orange Revolution. With Korda Kozatsky, we continued to the Maidan of Dignity. And now the third activity we called war. And at this point, really World War III, where I use music, as one musician said, for my instruments to destroy the fascists, right? Who is that? Woody Guthrie or one of these old folkies. And this is what I do. I go to the Maidans with my instruments. Standing in the cold for hours isn't interesting. It's better to go into the warm metro station or the city hall and give Kobzar concerts, playing specific music for the specific protest of gaining one's independence from Russia. And especially during the war, to be able to go to the front and have hundreds. I've had hundreds of concerts for soldiers on the entire front, from really, you might say, from, Chernihiv down to Kherson. And again, all the work that I've been doing, all my education, making instruments and having these fantastic instruments and the repertoire to play and practice singing them, in the West as well as Ukraine, and having the opportunity to add that element to the war, the element of the practicing Ukrainian Kobzar who resurrects the spirits of the Ukrainian Dead Poets Society. And I've had a wonderful time doing it. And that's what I'm doing in Europe in these next 2 months. I will be, sowing the seeds as Oleksandr Koshitz, Kanat Kotkevich, Mykola Lysenko, Hrory Katasti. They had the same projects as the traditional Kobzars did, going, sometimes where no man or no Kobzar has gone before. specifically, even to, not Ukrainians. I do probably half of these, 700 concerts in these 4 years for non-Ukrainians. Tomorrow, hopefully, a lot of Germans will come out, and I will be able to not just, speak in English about what's happening on the front, what's happening in America. This has been my very big study for the past year. I've been flipping out, and I think you know why. Things very, as they say, we're not in Kansas anymore talking about the U.S. And Europe wants to know. And on what hand, imagine I'm a Native American, right? My Kessner German family was, my grandmother was a daughter of the American Revolution, but also I am one of probably the most active practitioner of the Kobzar tradition. And that's very, very specific, very, very weird, but it's very, very wonderful. And people who don't know a word of Ukrainian, even Ukrainians who know maybe literary Ukrainian, but don't know language of, let's say, Church Slavonic or Cossack Baroque or Renaissance or the language of Shevchenko even. This is specific language, but the spirit in the music and me, translating the texts and tying the texts into the present philosophy of how to make our world freer, how to defend our, sovereignty and independence. All these elements come together, and it's, very original. It's very needed. It's very powerful. And I mean, you can just imagine, having, a super job and this thing, not just, a touring musician. That's, great. Or, some Americans dream of being rock stars like Mick Jagger. That's not so interesting for me. There's lots of rock stars, but a Kobzar, who is that? Could that be something like I do? Am I in the Kobzar path? And all these questions of reviving the Kobzar, not just in the modern day when we haven't had Kobzars in the past, 90 years, but during war, what would the Kobzar do had he had eyes, had he had, a hybrid Toyota to be able to go around Europe, for very cheap? Had he had all these technologies like Facebook, like Zoom, right, iPhone? And this is a fantastic, really, research and practice of renewing Ukraine through renewing and reviving this old, very archaic Kobzar tradition, which is for Ukrainians probably the most beloved. But a lot of Ukrainians say, we don't know the Kobzar, we don't know the Kobza. Who were these people? Were they, little Shevchenkos? And I say, no, these were blind preachers who would go in Moscow occupied territory. These guys were blind. They, often were killed, and eventually they were all killed in 1933. But imagine a musician who has his own language. These guys were so afraid of being killed by Moscow. They created their own Kobzar language called Libysky language. And this is just so inspiring for a researcher. And just the idea that maybe these Kobzars were, the national elite, which kept Ukraine together for all these years, or at least until 1933 when they were killed, when the Cossack tradition was compromised after the destruction of the siege of the Cossack fortress. And just the potential of, again, not going to the front with an automatic, machine gun, but going with a Ukrainian Baroque lute, the Torban, the Kobza, and Bandura. Again, I don't know I also say, I don't know what the generals tell the Cossacks, what they tell the military, but I know what Mazepa, Shevchenko, Skovoroda, the Kobzars would tell them. I have the texts. So this idea of resurrecting this dead poets society of Ukraine. And interesting, it works. It's fantastic. It's really on a different level.
We're almost out of time, but I did want to ask you a final question. How do everyday Ukrainians view your efforts, particularly the people in the village where you live now?
Well, I think in general, Ukrainian villages, as the city dwellers as well, they see me as, a super, Ukrainian superhero, somebody doing missionary work. It is a mission. I mean, you don't make money, especially in Ukraine. I've made nothing. I've really debts in Ukraine because of you never make money doing this stuff. But they see me as a hero. All the journalists, love to give interviews, and they've come to the village. Now, my specific village, that's a different story. For them, it's very weird. This was a completely isolated, area during the Soviet years. They're not used to having Americans or Americans who deal with, making instruments and doing these weird Kobzar tradition revivals. So for them, they don't understand that. These are farmers, fantastic people. God, bless them that they're still alive and doing what they know how to do best. But for them, it's very weird. And I know that they all support me, but I'm a little bit too close for their comfort. They're afraid of Putin taking over the village, as they did in, when was it, 1922? And they're afraid that there will be repression, and afraid of the energy that I have as an American, as a Ukrainian, as a Kobzar practitioner. So for them, it's a little bit too close for comfort, and especially when I bring journalists into the village, and the journalists ask about the villagers, and I have to tell the truth. And some things aren't so, talking about alcoholism or education of children in the village. There's some, problems we have, of course, you can imagine, in a Ukrainian village, especially in Eastern Ukraine. But I try to be truthful and try very much to support the folks. I mean, bless their hearts. And after 15 years, I think the village is changing for the better. I mean, our kids are singing with the village, youth. And little by little, they are starting to understand this ethno movement, not just, Soviet, popular music. And I think even the villagers themselves, even though they're the folks who don't come to our festival, still, I know that when we came back after 5 months of the full-scale war, they were so happy because our being back for them meant there will be not another Blitzkrieg as we had 4 years ago.
Jurij, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thanks, Michael. Fantastic. Thanks for helping out and getting my story out.
Speaking with Jurij Fedynskyj, a Ukrainian American composer, musician, singer-songwriter, luthier, cultural activist, and teacher known for his dedication to reviving and preserving ancient Ukrainian folk music traditions. This episode of Krynytsia is produced for The Ukrainian Weekly, a newspaper published in English for the global Ukrainian community since 1933. And I'm Mike Burek, your host and producer of Krynytsia. Until next time, that's all for now.